in the chat, so it's
No
fine
worries,
with me.
as long as you give a verbal, sweet. Then that
that's
works for
fine.
me. All right,
Is-
I'll go ahead and pop out and let the meeting start. Good luck, y'all.
Is this better for everyone?
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, is everyone good to go now?
Oh, guys, open or close CX?
Oh, yeah.
Keith, you call it, Bob. I don't care.
The judges are okay with it. We can do open. I'm fine with it either way.
I'm
Okay.
good, yeah.
And because it's a final round of the charity tournament, do y'all want to do thanks on or off?
All for me.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks
Okay.
off, clock.
Cool. So before I start the clock, extending a big blanket of thank yous, I'm super excited to debate for charity. With that, let's get started with today's resolution of charter schools are ruining education. Today, obviously, ruining is going to be the biggest definition that we need in the round. So to ruin for Merriam-Webster is to subject to frustration, failure, or disaster. We're going to weigh this today on a preponderance of logic, judge. Is it or is it not ruining education? When we look at the first contention under the affirmative, we're going to look at segregation. So point A, it further divides. From Justice in Education Initiative, we see charter school pop-ups segregate people. They kick Black students out 4 times as much or as white students. We see that disabled students are 2 times more likely to be kicked out or discriminated against. We see from Huffington Post 2017 that a new report from the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity at the University of Minnesota Law describes how charter schools are worsening segregation and failing to achieve consistent academic improvement. We look at the subpoint B, how separate does not mean equal. We see this in the Brown versus Board of Education. We see from Huffington Post 2017, in the subset of schools, low-income children of color are almost completely isolated. We're seeing that they're giving equal opportunity, but not really, but in a separate type of classroom. But we see that separate does not mean equal. Segregation is not equal. When we look to the subpoint C, from disparate impact for Society of Human Resource Management, we see that this refers to discriminatory practices and policies that appear in disproportionate impact, and it impacts protected groups. Federal laws prohibit this, but unfortunately, charter schools do not have to follow these laws. So we see that they are that they can get around the protection of disabled students, of students in poverty, of students of color. When we look to the second contention, we see it is a school to prison pipelines. Subpoint A, it takes money away. 2017 Public Dollar says that Texas paid $2.2 billion in charter schools alone in 1 year, but we're already seeing severe underfunding in our public schools. We are taking billions and billions of dollars away from our public schools for these charter schools that are not giving a good education. When we go to the subpoint B, we're seeing a dip in quality and an increase in dropout rates. We see from education consignment populations, 40% of prisoners dropped out and were kicked out of the education system. We're seeing that there are high dropout and kickouts happening in charter schools. And we see that this is directly linked with correlation and causation to prison. When we look to the subpoint C, we're costing millions of dollars and we're just creating prisoners. When we look to Georgetown University 2018, we are costing $548 million in the prison system with the amount of prisoners going in. And we're seeing that this is directly because of the dropout rates that are increasing with charter schools. When we look to the last contention, no accountability, subpoint A, is they underperform. Texas Agency 2017 says that charter schools have a 3 times as many dropout rates. Only 62% of people in charter school finish on time, and they underperform on standardized tests and general tests. When we look at the subpoint B, this is because there's no regulation. From Education Consensus of the State, it says that charter schools do not have to follow regulations, and they only have to follow certain small regulations that the states provide specifically for the charter schools, but they do not regulate their curriculum or their content being taught, which leads to the subpoint C, misappropriation, from Washington Post 2019. It sees that $1 billion per year are being wasted of federal funds on charter schools that are leading to underperformance with students. With that, I stand down for CX.
righty then. 2 minutes on the clock. Everyone ready? Perfect. So great speech, Mackenzie. Just a couple of quick questions for you. I want to start with the second contention. Where's the internal link between the prison rates going up specifically related to charter schools?
So that's found in between our second and third contentions, with the dropout rates specifically increasing solely in charter or majority in charter schools, and we're seeing that this leads to bigger or more amount of people going to prison.
Okay, but aren't dropout rates increasing across public and charter schools?
Not to the same extent. As our evidence showed, what we're seeing is not only are we underfunding public schools because we're stealing money from them to get to charter schools, but we're seeing a higher rate of dropout in charter schools. And the Georgetown study specifically links dropping out to or incarceration.
Okay, but if charter schools only make up less than, I don't know, 10% of the kids in school, how is it directly increasing
Because it's leading to more dropout rates. So there is a bigger dropout rate, and majority of dropouts coming from the charter schools rather than the public schools.
Okay, well, but what's that number then? Because you keep saying it's a higher number. What are those numbers?
I didn't get a specific, this many specifically with this many, but our own sources say 3 times as many. Yeah.
And that's,
but if it's
which is a state government source.
If it's 3 times of 9 or 10% of the population, it's still not going to be a significant number, is it?
That is very significant when you talk about not only dropping out, but the cost that it is currently having in the status quo of hundreds of millions of dollars, and the fact that they're leading to incarceration.
Are all those numbers that you guys have from 2017? Because all the numbers we found.
2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. So this is a consistent problem that we're seeing across the board.
Okay.
All right, if everybody will just give me the first big thumbs up for me. Oh, I'm glad everybody gives me a thumbs up that I win. Just kidding. All right, so of course with the off the time thank yous, like I said in the beginning of this tournament, I never could have imagined that it would have turned out the way that it did. And 2 of the big reasons for that are actually in this room, and that's Keith and that's Adam, who actually stated and talked about how we could make this a charity and raise money. So to be in here with all of us is absolutely amazing. Mackenzie is the best person in the whole wide world, so I could not be happier. But the other thank you I want to give is actually to Preston and the Tab crew who did this so that I could come and have fun with my good buddy Keith, because it's been a long, long time. But the very last thank you is to my wife. It's our anniversary, and she let me come do this. So with that, let us begin. And we will begin with an overview that very simply, whenever we see a problem, it's easy to blame a single actor or a single entity. But the truth is that in every case, there are multiple factors that must be recognized in order to be fixed. And that's what the affirmative fails to do in today's round, is recognize that there is not a single thing that is ruining public education or education as a whole. And it is why Keith and I are proud to negate. We will begin our negation of this round with some simple resolutional analysis, some burdens that we feel that the affirmative must show us in today's round. We're going to start with the word or kind of the whole of the resolution, that they have to prove a direct causation that charter schools are causing directly this problem. But the second thing that you need to remember is that any combination or any other thing besides charter schools is neg ground and is a neg ballot. So I want y'all to keep that in mind as we go through. The second bit of resolution analysis is on the word ruining that Mackenzie tells us is going to be so key. The number one argument here is the AF must show us a bright line. Like, what point do we pass where charter schools are ruining education? But the second is, what is actually ruining it, and how is it unique to what charter schools have done? And none of this has been shown coming out of the 1AC, so I am calling for it now coming out of the 2AC. The third thing is going to be, I want you to remember on that idea with the burden of proof and everything that else goes with it, that the affirmative is making a lot of large links and claiming that this leads to this and this is the cause of that with no directional tie to it. And that's what Keith's getting to in cross-examination, and I'm sure that he's going to talk about it in the next week. Looking at the first off-case scenario. The number one is that this is a wide sweeping statement that you cannot put on every single charter school. The A subpoint says that you can't blame all for the failures of some. And ed100.org talks about that in California, there are well over 1,000 different charter schools, and California is the biggest charter school state. And that very simply that each one of them is different. Some are good, some not so much, but that there simply is not a magic wand or a magic statement for them all. But the B is going to be whenever you look to charter schools, they're actually performing on the same line, contrary to what McKinsey tells us. And that's very simply that the graduation rates and the standardized testing rates are actually equal with charter schools, if not in many cases, some better. But what we can see is that generally they perform about the same or a higher level. But the C is going to be completely contrary to the affirmative case, and that minorities are seeing charter schools as their way out to beat the odds. And this comes from that same article. And what it talks about is that public schools with low infrastructure, low money, and high crime in them, that minorities there are actually seeing charter schools as a way out and a way to beat the odds. Looking at the second contention, the trend analysis. The A subpoint is that actually charter school numbers for minorities are up and they're down for Caucasians. The A specifically talks about that the Hispanics are up 19 to 33%. Whites are actually down from 43 to 32%, and black enrollment is actually up 26 to 33%. But the B here talks about from 2015 or 2005 to 2016, ed.org tells us that enrollment in charter schools has tripled because of the increase of the minorities that we're looking at. So the C leads me to the impact. That what we are seeing is because of a failing school system, that people are seeing the out or the way to beat the odds as charter schools. I turn to the number 3, alternate causation. And I want you to keep in mind that the affirmative must show that the cause, the direct cause, is charter schools. Here's what's wrong with the education system. This is going to take a minute. The A subpoint is going to be that very simply, there's a deficit in public school funding, right? And now the app talks about that and wants to blame it directly on the charter schools, but the actual analysis to that is that it's not true. They were well underfunded long before charter schools came into existence, and they continue to be underfunded. And what we talks about here is that very simply that more money is needed, right, for both systems. But the B under this is that school safety. 50% of students and a large amount of the teachers actually worry about gun violence whenever they go to school. The C is going to be challenges with technology. While technology helps us a lot, what we have seen is that people kids instead of learning are actually increasing cheating. And the D is that teachers' salaries have decreased dramatically, which has lowered their performance. I now stand down for cross-examination and points of clarification.
Are all public schools underfunded?
Are all public schools underfunded? That would be a really big generalization for me to make, Adam, so I'm not going to say yes or no.
Your second and third point, your subpoint C of contingent 2 and your entire third contingent is that the public education system is failing, correct? Is that not a widespread claim, the same as you're saying that no one can make or is completely invalid in your...
You're misrepresenting the third contention. What the third contention is talking about is that there is no single cause for why education is going down and education is failing. There are multiple causes. It's kind of the overview that I talked about at the beginning.
Aren't your multiple causes widespread or wide sweeping statements? Aren't each of them about safety?
Absolutely not.
Because
if it's a wide sweeping statement, it would be the idea that education is failing because of this one thing, right? This points to multiple factors. Now, we recognize that in different situations, multiple factors are there. So in one school, funding is the problem. In the other school, teacher salaries is the problem.
Excellent. If I am a 2-pack-a-day smoker, and I'm morbidly obese, and I don't work out, and I don't wear a mask. Does that mean smoking isn't ruining my health because I also have other bad habits?
Right. Okay. So that's a really interesting hypothetical. I would be happy to answer an actual question about the case, but hypotheticals, as you know, are set up to design to prove your point, and I'm not going to fall into that.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you can't answer the question.
No, that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you would like a question about this and not a hypothetical that is specifically designed to prove a point, it's not a real question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
All right, thanks off the clock. I'm going to do my best to not get full and emotional with this. First off, thank you to my partner, Mackenzie. I've been teaching UAM for 3 years. I met Mackenzie after she had been hit and run over by a car and still showed up to debate practice. I'm not kidding. She did that. And she impressed me with an incredible amount at that point, and I'm so happy to be in her senior year debating with her today. To be able to debate Keith Milstead and AJ Edwards again. Keith came after my time. AJ was a senior when I was first in IPDA. I think we got like 1 round back then. And lastly, for the good cause that started as a conversation. I've been arguing with people on the internet for years, but this is the first time I could potentially help raise $6,500 for a children's cancer charity. So I thank everyone for being here. Oh, 7? Woo! All right, that said, starting time. Okay, first and foremost, let's get to what AJ said. So they give this idea of overview and the idea that, that there are multiple factors. But if you go and you look to the definition of rooting that we provided, simply that is something that to subject to frustration, failure, or disaster. Now, our first response to here is IPDA, as Keith, as the president of the organization, well knows, is IPDA has the affirmative has the exclusive right to define, and furthermore, they have to show that we're taking away their ground. That is the only basis by which they can challenge their definition. So this idea that multiple factors, as long as at the end of it, judges, you believe that charter schools are subjecting the education to frustration, failure, or disaster, and they have ground to argue, which clearly they do because they've provided some good points and their off case is directly relevant to ours, then the definition must stand. They cannot put additional burdens on us. Secondly, in terms of right line, we have proven this because it's literally subjecting it to frustration by stealing money from an already underfunded system, which my opponents admit. In fact, that's a very good term for the affirmative there, is they admit that in the first place. Third, the idea that the resolution doesn't say have ruined or is the only thing ruining. It simply says ruining. Multiple things can be doing the same thing simultaneously. So if I am, he wouldn't answer my analogy. He was like, I'm not going to talk about a hypothetical. I wouldn't want to talk about it either if I were in the negative, because the analogy, as Socrates regularly used, proves what their analysis wrong. Because the fact is, if I'm a smoker and I am not, and I am eating too much and I'm not, working out and I'm not wearing a mask and I get COVID, it could be a multiplicity of things that cause my death, but I'm still just as dead. And it's the combination of that. Each one of them is independently ruining my health. So therefore, like smoking would ruin my lungs and drinking would ruin my liver, but that's all ruining my health. And that's exactly what our affirmation here is today. So then we get into the idea of wide sweeping statements. He says we cannot blame all for the failures of some. If you're going to buy this, judges, then you must reject the rest of the negatives case, because that is exactly what they do. They deny doing it cross-examination, but when he says schools are underfunded, he admits not all schools are underfunded, and yet he's blaming all for the failures of some. Therefore, if you're going to buy his argumentation contention 1, you must wholly reject contention 3. Same thing with school safety, same thing with teacher salaries, same thing with challenges with technology. However, if we look at the system as a whole, what we can see is essentially what he's making, judges, is the equivalent. Anytime you post something, say about like the rates at which men sexually assault women, you'll get this hashtag not all men response, and that is the equivalent of what the negative is saying today. They're like, oh, I found one man who didn't. No, enough men, enough charter schools are having enough of a cause that are doing something. If we could prove every single charter school was the sole cause, Keith and AJ would then call us abusive and say it's a truism. So they're trying to put the affirmative in a double bind here, and that's not how debate works. That's certainly not how IPDA works. So then we get to this idea where they say charter schools perform better or higher. What they have is a news article. What we have is a report from the Texas Education Agency. Keep in mind, Texas is perhaps the most conservative state in the union. Charter schools are a favorite of Republicans. For instance, our former colleague and current Arkansas State Representative Mark Lowry, who used to be the coach at UCA, has a bill promoting charter schools right now. Texas wants to make charter schools look good, so when the Texas Education Agency comes out and says that they're underperforming, you should prefer our evidence to their news article, because government agency interested in making charter schools look good. And then he says the minorities see it as a way out. As Dr. Jim Towns at Steve of Austin is famous for saying, perception is truth regardless of the facts. The fact is, our study from the Journal of Justice and Education shows that we're actually segregating them. So even if they perceive it that way, they're not actually getting it because they're not subject to the same anti-discrimination laws, and we're seeing direct links to prison. They keep saying over and over again that we're not showing links, but we show you studies from Georgetown University. We show you like multiple sources. I don't have the time to relist all of the sticky notes that McKinsey just went over for you. Then he talks about higher minority enrollment. It doesn't matter how much you enroll. See our subpoint about separate, not equal, because they kick out students of color at 4 times the rate of white students. And more importantly, they take them and they put them in other classes so the white rich students get a better preparation. They are increasing segregation. They are increasing further class divide. They're increasing the divide between the haves and have-nots. And for all these reasons, we can show multiple reasons why we are subjecting the education system to frustration and everything. Thank you.
All right, everybody good? All right, so one of the first things that you say on the off case is we can choose either number 1 or number 3, right? But that they don't go together. Explain why again, please.
To quote you, you cannot blame all for the failures of some. So essentially, what your point saying that you can't blame all charter schools for the failures of some are good, some are bad, etc. But then you admit that not all public schools are underfunded. So you're doing the exact thing that you're critiquing us for doing.
So
Right.
you're using the alters and alternatives, but these alters and alternatives are essentially ruining at the same rate as charter schools. So if you say we can't include charter schools, we can't include any of the things that you
Right, so, but in the first part of the analysis, you talk about this health issue and that there can be multi-factors. So are you saying that we can use both or that I have to choose one? I'm trying to figure out what we're getting to.
What I'm saying is, unless you are going to articulate what you've already contradicted, that all public schools are unfunded, that they all worry about school safety, that they all have challenges, or that they all have teacher salary issues, then you have to kick your first contention, because at that point you're blaming all for the failures of some.
Right,
Or
okay.
you can keep the third contention and keep the first one, but those are.
But aren't you? You're doing the same thing with charter schools. You're saying all charter schools are doing these things.
So the issue lies in the fact that you're putting yourselves into a mutually exclusive double bind. So we see that your first and your third are mutually exclusive, but you're arguing for both in your case. You have to choose one or the other in order for the affirmative to have accurate rebuttals against them.
Otherwise, you become a moving target.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't show you that you're wrong, that all charter schools are not doing the same thing, and then also point out that there are multiple factors?
We never said all charter schools are doing this. We're looking at charter schools as a group overall, the same.
A majority. So a majority does not equal
Okay,
all.
so where's the
you're-
bright line on the majority?
This are not all men points.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, everyone ready? Cool. Quick off the clock. I don't want to take people's time so we can get through this, but thank you all so much for being here. I echo everything that's been said. so far from everybody, how much of an honor it is to be here and doing this with you guys. Hopefully this is fun and entertaining. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and start my 4 minutes right now. So I'm going to start with the burden analysis at the top of the case and then go straight down the case for you. With the burden analysis, we don't argue topicality the way Adam suggested we do. We never said that they were being unfair, but they just became unfair. Because in Adam's speech, what he says is that multiple things can be wrong and the AF wins, right? If all these things can be wrong and it can be quote unquote ruining education, all they have to do is show one thing that charter schools is doing to quote unquote, by their definition, frustrate education, then it's an AF ballot. And there's non-existent ground for the negative at that point, because they can spike out of all this additional analysis that we give you and say that all we have to do, because the word frustrate is in the definition, if one specific thing in charter schools is frustrating education, that's an AF ballot and there's no neg ground at that point. Number two response to that is to use Adam's own analysis and his own analogy when he talks about his health deterioration. And I'm sorry to have to do this. This is really hard for me to say. But if someone dies from COVID-19, what goes on their death certificate? COVID-19. It doesn't list all the things and all the bad things that they had health-wise that led to them being more possibly dying from COVID-19. It lists one thing, that COVID-19 ruined that person's chance of living. Just in the same sense, the affirmative burden is to prove to you that charter schools are single-handedly, or at the very least, the vast majority, ruining education. That's why the neg ground still stands. Let's get to the on-case debate. Under the first contention, when they talk about segregation, they talk about kicking black students out and disabled students. We have two responses to this. Number one, our numbers don't show this. If you look at the first contention that my partner gives you, which is from the National Center of Education, it's not a news article. The National Center of Education statistics shows that these numbers are actually going up. Two, this is non-unique to charter schools. It's happening all throughout our school system, public and charter. They can't just tell you that it's a problem with charter schools and then ignore the fact that it's a problem with public schools as well. It's a problem across all education, not just charter schools. Under the B set point, is separate is not equal. We grant that argument. We can grant the B and the C argument that all of those things are bad, but none of them proves that they're ruining education. Just because segregation is happening, which A, again, is non-unique because it's happening in school systems, public school systems as well, but B, it doesn't prove the resolution true. Yes, they get the right to define, but they don't get the right to not look at the words of the resolution. And it says charter schools are ruining education. It doesn't say segregation is ruining education, because that's what's happening. Let's get to the second contention where they talk about the prisoner pipeline. The A sub point they talk about, the A sub point is specific to Texas, unless I missed something. That's not specific to all charter schools. Two, this is non-unique. Again, the funding over, and this is according to Public School Review, in the last 20 years, many states show a 16 to 18% decrease in funding coming from the federal government. That's across all public schools. So that's not just specific to charter schools that are having dropout. They're seeing students drop out in public schools and charter schools. And that answers the B subpoint to some degree as well. They keep telling you under the B subpoint, they keep telling you the numbers are increasing for charter schools, but they can't tell you what those numbers are. They just say that the rate in charter schools is higher than public schools, but they can't tell you what those numbers are. In the C subpoint, they say millions of dollars are being spent and quote unquote only creating prisoners. This disregards every possible advantage that charter schools are offering. And secondly, it doesn't take into account all the various factors the negative gives you as to why that funding is going down. On the third contention of no accountability, pretty much all our evidence contradicts these numbers from the National Center of Education. And secondly, under the B subpoint, it says charters don't have to follow regulations. That's not true. They have their own regulations. They just don't have to follow federal regulations.
All right, cool beans. Everyone ready? Cool. So what is it that the app has to prove today?
I mean, I think I pretty much just said that, but essentially the affirmative burden is to prove the resolution to be true. You have to show that there's
right. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Do we have to prove 100% or a truism?
I said a vast majority.
Okay. Okay.
You have to directly link or tie charter schools as being the one thing on some level that's ruining education.
Yeah. So Heath, If somebody has COVID-19 and they get in a car wreck and die, what gets are you saying COVID-19 gets listed on their
No,
death
I-
certificate?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you look at the hospitalization records that we have in the COVID era, when they record someone who died of COVID, especially in a hospital, the cause of death goes down as COVID. If you die in a car accident, then the cause of death would obviously not be COVID.
Do you know what a contributing factor is in the cause of death on a death certificate?
Absolutely. And my wife is a nurse. She deals with this day in and day out.
In the resolution, does it specify anywhere that we have to prove that it is the only cause?
No, but the problem is the words of the resolution. You guys are trying to spike out what the words in the resolution says. The resolution says charter schools are ruining education. It doesn't say partially to blame for education. It says they're ruining it.
Speaking of word meaning, does the word only or exclusively appear in the resolution?
Again, in order for you to make that argument, it's a cake.
If you could just answer my question, please. We answered your questions. Does the word only or exclusively appear in the resolution?
No, but in order for you to make that argument, you spike out of any.
The resolution doesn't say is a factor.
Okay, if we say that it is a contributive factor instead of the only one, does that leave neg with no ground?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. That's all of our time.
I had to check the time to make sure, old timers and all that. All right. Last big thumbs up for me. We good? At the point that you can see that the affirmative is trying to spike out of the burdens in this round, you can tell that they are a major problem for them. And that's simply because they can't get around a topic that they chose that asked them to show direct causation. That's what the entire cross-examination is about, and you can see that obviously it is a problem. And here's why it's the problem. Whenever we look to the resolution, it says charter schools are ruining education. It doesn't say charter schools are a part of the ruining of education. It doesn't say charter schools are a factor in ruining the education. It simply says charter schools are ruining it. That means that they are the one that's causing it. At this point, you can vote negative because the entire third contention goes cold dropped as to all of the other factors. If there's a different factor that plays just as much, if not more of a factor that as charter schools, it's an easy neg ballot right now. You can stop flowing if you want. Looking at the actual further resolution analysis. Adam says that multiple things can do, right? And it's simultaneously. Number one, the resolution doesn't allow them to spike out of this. Number two, remember Keith's argument about if you die of COVID-19, that's what's listed on the autopsy or whatever we want to call it, right? It's not COVID-19, plus they had all of these different things, right? This was the cause of death. So what you can see is a direct correlation, looking at the number one off case. He says that if you take the number one, you have to reject the rest of the case. Number one, you don't buy this because very simply, I'm telling you that some charter schools are really, really good and that they're not bad, right? And then showing other flaws in the neg case or in the app case and other problems are not contradictory in any way. What I'm saying is they shouldn't make a wide sweeping statement because we're not making that wide sweeping statement. We tell you specifically that some charter schools aren't great, but that some very, very well are. The next thing that Adam talks about is this hashtag all men, right? And that it's not enough. Well, number one, this is an absolute huge conflations of the issues. Number two is what I'm telling you is that there are some problems in charter schools, right? So I get around that. But then I tell you that whenever Adam says all charter schools are bad because that, he's actually biting his own argument here. So turn it. The next thing is this news article talks about. One, remember, he's talking about Texas article, not charter schools across the country. Number two, remember, it's the National Center for Education. Number three, that doesn't deny the actual analysis. Looking at the number two, when I tell you the trend analysis, he says separate, not equal on the minorities. He forgets the C analysis that comes where it says minorities are looking at charter schools as their way out. Pull it through, start, circle it. It's the biggest thing in the round at this point. The number three, all of the alternate causations go absolutely untouched, right? There are multiple factors of why this is a problem. At the point that they can't show the direct causation and have to say it's just a part of the problem, you know you're voting neg right now. Ask for a negative ballot.
Okay. All right. So quick quick thank yous before we get on time, if the judges are all ready, and my opponents. Cool. So this is the last time you're hearing from me today and in this tournament, and I'm so glad I got to be a part of all of this. So just a big blanket of thank yous to everyone. It's amazing. I always love debating you, AJ. This is the first time I've got to hit Keith. Keith is one of the people that inspired me to go into debate. And to my partner, Adam, he has watched me and helped me grow and helped lead me to championships. And I'm just super excited to do this. So with that being said, let's start off at the top case. When we really look about this definition thing and the resolutional analysis, charter schools are ruining education. Nowhere in this is it inherent that we have to say only charter schools. Now, when we look at the fact of whataboutism, that's essentially what my opponents are coming up and giving you. But when we look at what the neg ground has, the neg ground, if we say that charter schools are something that is ruining education, they are something that is ruining education. When you look into America, people will say millennials are ruining America, but that's not the only factor that they're talking about. It's just a popular phrase. It's a way of phrasing. But when we look at the fact that neg still has ground to show that, and they have accurately shown that they can argue this ground, that charter schools aren't actually a problem at all, or not a significant enough problem. So that is their ground. So we can have where there are multiple factors, and charter schools are one of the biggest factors, or just a big factor in the affirmative world, and still leave plenty of neg ground. And they have tried arguing this, and therefore shows that that is accurate ground for them. So you have to prefer the way that we have set up this resolution. So you can kick their third contention completely gone, because that is not a reason to vote in negation. When we look at the first, I'm going to go ahead and go back onto the affirmative case. When we look at the first contention on the segregation, they say, oh, but the rates of enrollment are higher. That doesn't disprove or negate anything talking about Black students are 4 times more likely to be kicked out and to be segregated, and disabled students are discriminated against and kicked out. That is something that has not been touched and is completely wrong in the education system. Not only that, Judge, my opponents say that segregation isn't a big deal in the schools. It happens both in public and in charter schools. Not only is it more likely to happen in charter schools, but it is a huge problem no matter what. So we see that that is a huge, huge problem. Our second contention, they drop the analysis where we actually give the link from the prison rates growing to charter schools, especially in our subpoint C and in our B. Those links are directly correlated and causated between prison and charter school dropout rates. When we go into the last contention under the affirmative, when we talk about the accountability, they said, oh, they have equal rates or higher, and we have it from a government Department of Education source. Not only do we have it from a Texas education source, we have it from the Education Commission of the state, we have it from Manhattan Institute, we have it from the Educational Correlation Populations, and we have it from different universities across the states, Judge. Our sources are just as valid, and they show that these numbers are actually not only wrong, that the dropout rate is 3 times more, they don't reach 62% of graduation, that their scores are actually significantly lower, but we see that this is a consistent problem because these sources come from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. So we see it's a consistent problem. Not only, yeah, they drop the analysis of that we're taking away public funding. Yeah, just because we were underfunded before, that's like saying that somebody is starving, now we're going to take away your food stamps, Judge. That's still a huge, huge problem. Just because they were starving before does not mean that taking away their food stamps was not a problem. When we go into the negative contention, I'm going to kind of argue this wholly because we see that it doesn't really stand in today's round, because this ignores the idea that multiple things can ruin you. When you die, there are contributing factors that are listed. My cousin works at Children's. When a child dies, which is super, super sad, there are contributing factors listed of all diseases and problems that they have. So yes, there can be multiple factors in when something is ruined. Therefore, not only has affirmative met their burden, but they have shown that charter schools are ruining education, not only with cost, but increase in prison rates and lower education as a whole. Remember, charter schools do not have regulation on their content or curriculum. That I stand down.
All right, everyone ready? Adam, you ready? Cool. All right, real quickly off the clock again. Thank y'all so much. Hopefully this has been fun and entertaining and educational. And please don't mistake my my tone of voice as anything other than love. I just get a little hyped up for debate, but it does not mean that I am angry with anyone that to come across. But I love everybody. Love you, Mackenzie. I'm so glad to see you here. Okay. All right. That said, let's jump right into the last time you're going to hear from the negative today. Look, this round really boils down to one thing in particular. And that's whether or not the affirmative, the interpretation gives fair net ground. And I think I say in the last speech, if you allow essentially the affirmative interpretation, you're saying that if they show basically any significant harms at all, really not even significant, if they show any harms at all from charter schools to then they win. And that is that's a non-existent ground at that point for the negative. And I want to start kind of where Mackenzie left off. You know, she said that there can be contributing factors. Absolutely, there can be contributing factors. But the resolution doesn't say charter schools are contributing to ruining education. It doesn't say charter schools are hindering or causing a problem with education. It says they're ruining them. And it brings me back to the COVID example that I give you. While yes, someone can have contributing factors and die from COVID, what goes on the death certificate? It goes one thing, and that's COVID. And that's the affirmative burden. We didn't pick the topic. That's what the topic says. If you allow the affirmative interpretation, they are essentially discrediting part of the words in the resolution. The resolution says charter schools are ruining education. So if at any point that we can show you that it's not ruining education or that it's non-unique to charter schools because it's happening across all schools, then that's a neg ballot, plain and simple. Now, on the flow a little bit more specifically, and Mackenzie says, well, it doesn't say only charter schools are ruining education, but that's essentially what they're binding the negative into trying to argue that only one thing can contribute to the ruining of education. And quite frankly, an affirmative ballot at this point, and my partner tells you this in the very beginning of his first speech, he says, you know, if we try to place blame on any one thing for ruining education in America, then we're never going to fix the many problems that are in the educational system. And so by giving the affirmative ballot, you're essentially discrediting all these other things that are significantly ruining education, not just harming, but ruining education. And those things don't ever get addressed, because if we accept the affirmative interpretation, we allow ourselves to say one specific thing is ruining it. Now, a lot of the analysis on the case misses the point that I tried to make, especially the first and second contention. The argument that I made specifically on the first and second contention is that these things are non-unique. They're not just happening in charter schools. They're happening across all school systems. The other problem, again, with the first and second contention is look at the data we give you in the off case that completely contradicts these things. So at the end of the day, you've got the affirmatives data saying one thing, the negatives data saying the other. In the first off case point, AJ tells you that that charter schools are equal to public school in graduation rates. That's a direct hit against the dropout point. So if you look at the data that we give you on the off case, it completely contradicts with what the affirmative tells you, and you're left with two sources that say different things. Look at the trend analysis under the second contention in the off case, where it says the number of minorities has significantly increased in charter school participation, which is a direct hit against their segregation point. And then the big thing is the B sub point under the second off case point that AJ already pointed out. Minorities are looking to charter schools as a way out. So that's going to be my first voter, is that has gone complete cold drop throughout the entire round. It's too late for them to bring it up at this point, that minorities are looking to charter schools to actually get out of this segregation. Two is that just because segregation happens, that any potential discrimination happens. We agreed that that's bad. But that doesn't mean it's ruining education, because it's been happening for years across all forms of education. And then third, I love Adam, but if he gets up here and tells you that all they have to do is show that there's a harm, that's an affirmative ballot, then there's no neg ground. And that should be the third reason for decision.
You're unmuted.
We have officially made it to the last speech of the tournament. This has been a real walk down memory lane, and I'm going to start tearing up if I start talking to charities, so I'm just grateful we're here. Instead, I think I'm going to say, to paraphrase what Keith had said, to paraphrase a good friend of AJ's and Keith's and mine, Steve Good, debate should be two things, fun and educational, and I think everyone can agree that this round is absolutely both. So let's finish having our fun and finish our education with the last speech. Judges ready? Oh, and I do need to thank Mackenzie and Wolfpack. All right, let's do this. Judges, one of the great things about IPDA is we're not supposed to be having arguments like this. When Alan Serlin founded this organization, the late Alan Serlin, God rest his soul, he specifically tried to get away from the excesses of CETA and NDT and the later NPDA by having primarily one rule. Keith is the president. I'm debating two former national champions, multi-time. They know this rule. And the question, judges, really is, in front of you, this round is being recorded right now for history's sake. Are we going to follow our one rule or are we not? Because the one rule in IPDA is that the affirmative can set a set definition so long as the negative has ground. Now, the negative would prefer that we try to do a truism because that's what they're saying is has to prove vast majority of the time. But when we say vast majority of the time that it's harmful, they reveal their own ground. They could have gotten up here and argued that the vast majority of the time, charter schools are good things instead of having a ruining effect, that they're having a positive one. Regardless, just because they didn't debate doesn't mean they couldn't debate. I hate having definition arguments, but people will watch this round and this decision. We gave them fair ground. The fact that they didn't take it doesn't mean we didn't give it to them in the first place. If we did what they were asking them to do, they would have turned around and called truism on us and said we were being abusive because they didn't have ground because we proved it way too much of the time. Second voter, not all men. Essentially, this is what they're doing. They're engaging and saying, well, there are certain exceptions to this, and we can't blame all for the failures of some, but we can do it when this is an overarching problem. They accept this because in their third contention, which they claim we dropped, we obviously didn't because my analysis was it mutually conflicts with their first contention. Mackenzie, you picked this up. Essentially what this is they're blaming the system of public education when they admit it's not true for all the other ones. Judges, obviously they believe we can do this. We can evaluate education systems on the failures of a bunch, even if not all, because they do this. They do this with funding, they do this with teacher salaries, they do this with school safety. If they do this and that's okay, then it's ethical and right for us to be able to do so as well. And that solves the entire definition debate, judges. Their third contention does exactly what we are doing with other issues with the public education system, and therefore, then we get to the idea that multiple things can ruin. The fact is, on a death certificate, I was an EMT. There are multiple causes of death. Mackenzie tells you at Children's, we do the exact same thing. They never really turn the analysis. They say, oh, this causes harm. They can prove charter schools caused less harm and more good. They didn't do that. Do not hand them this round. Otherwise, it's going to set a precedent for everyone in the future who watches this round that you can simply complain definitions. It steals money from schools. They don't have to follow federal regulations, and it increases the prison population. These are unique harms. For these reasons, I asked for an affirmative ballot for the final time. Thank you.
Yay.
Adam Kinsey, amazing. So glad we got to do this. Adam, it's been too long. Fantastic, buddy.
Yeah. I'm a little better than I was a college sophomore, huh?
You've been a lot better for a long time, bud. Great. Great job.
Good job, guys.
Thank you. Good job, guys.